Hello, hello, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of HR at the Table. I am your host, Liv Carter. I get the pleasure of hosting our monthly webinar series, HR at the Table, every month, typically on the third Tuesday of the month as well. So if you're looking for upcoming events, we would love to have you join us. For those of you that it's your first time, or maybe you've joined one before or have been waiting to join one, HR at the Table is a webinar series that brings in leaders and HR professionals in the space and basically have a little interview style event. So almost like a podcast in a way. We'll have some visuals and whatnot, but really kind of that fireside chat conversation we love to have. We talk about just about everything under the sun related to HR, talent acquisition, people management. So for previous episodes, highly encourage you to go to the Verified First website. Under resources, there's an HR at the Table button, and you can explore previous episodes, including previous episodes of our speaker here today, who I'll introduce here in just a little bit. But before we jump into it, a few housekeeping items. First, I get this question throughout the webinar, and I'll remind us all at the end as well. Yes, today's episode is recorded, so don't worry if you are joining a little bit later, have to hop a little bit earlier. I know meetings exist and can take away some time, so no worries. This will be recorded and it'll be sent out shortly after the live event, as well as this event is, you can receive SHRM and HRCI credit. So at the end of today's event, we'll have a slide with those activity codes that you can then put in your SHRM and HRCI account and continue that education. Second or third, we encourage you to ask questions throughout today's event. Super excited to have our speaker back. He's been on multiple HR at the Tables before, so we will have a little bit of a different style today. Chris will really jump into some more visuals, which is even better, and dive a little bit deeper into today's topic, but still ask questions. There's a chat functionality and a question functionality. Either one I'll be monitoring, so we can have a little Q&A session at the end of today's event as well. And lastly, I just want to give a thank you and a shout out to today's episode sponsors, Smart Recruiters. Smart Recruiters is a great partner of Verified First, and we are so thankful that they are sponsoring today's episode. I'm sure some of you in the audience are clients of theirs, and we're grateful to have you join us today. So with that being said, let's introduce our topic and introduce our speaker. Today, we're going to be talking AI. So AI strategies for modern recruitment. Super excited to have Chris Courneen here. Chris has been on multiple episodes of HR at the Table. I think maybe one a year, roughly, as we're in season 4 now. Chris, before we jump into today's topic, why don't you introduce yourself, share a little bit about what you're passionate about, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Chris. I'm the global head of HR for a company called MSI. We are the leading distributor of, I'll call it flooring, wall and countertop hard surface products. If you have a stone countertop in the kitchen where you live, it's because of us. We kind of created that for the country many, many moons ago. So now we're really kind of focused on the building material industry and have locations all across the United States, Canada, and in India. Shocker with today's topic, I've been very kind of passionate and involved in a variety of different roles in my career on the kind of topic of AI, kind of going back to 2013 and my first projects, learning about machine learning, all the way through some pretty large transformative projects that we've engaged in here at MSI.
Yeah. And Chris, we've had you on previous episodes, and I will say a fan favorite for our subscribers. I would highly encourage you all to go take a look. Chris has just a lot of insight to share, and MSI has won a lot of culture awards, people awards, just really great stuff that Chris and his team are doing over there. So we are fortunate enough to have him back for another episode. Now, before we jump into it, Chris, I know we're gonna kind of pivot into another slide deck and really dive in. But before, for those of you that have joined an HR at the table before, you know we asked this poll question as part of our TA and Tech Buyer's Guide that we do every year. I'm going to go ahead and launch it as we're going to be talking about technology today. We're going to be speaking predominantly on AI and leveraging it right in different strategies. But this question really helps us share with all of you the direction and kind of the direction that this space is going when it comes to HR and talent acquisition technology. So Chris, I'm just curious, looking at the list and maybe something that's not on the list, when you think of technology advancements and adoption and solutions that maybe our audience should reevaluate in terms of AI, anything come to mind or any thoughts?
It's actually my main thought is particularly as it relates to this subject, the every single one of these technologies is currently and will continue to be dramatically impacted by AI, whether that's related to the processes with which I'll call it transactions are executed within these technologies, and improving those processes, or how large data lakes with the data that lives across these disparate systems can be leveraged using kind of a variety of models and some of them related to AI and some of them not, to gain insights that are very difficult to gain today. So I think this is interesting in part because everything we're going to talk about today is relevant to every single one of these systems. It is not unique to just talent acquisition.
Yeah. I think that's a great call out, Chris. And just to share the results with the audience, because I know it's always so interesting. ATS, applicant tracking, does tend to be number one. That's a trend we've seen this year, but we're seeing assessments creep up and increase over time as well. So really appreciate the feedback to everyone in our audience and just submitting their response there.
Yes.
Yeah, super interesting, right? And like I said, we like to kind of watch that month over month with this webinar series. So, Chris, with that, I say we kind of jump into it. I'm gonna stop sharing here and just let you run. Audience, I'm super excited for what Chris has to share with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about uh, AI in general, and I think really the starting point um, for. Are you able to see my slides? All right.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. The starting point for I think any real discussion around AI is no different than the starting point of every discussion I have with anyone as it relates to HR's role within the organization, and that is, generally speaking, what is our function within the business? And I ask this question of my team. I ask it with other people I speak with, and the answer really is our function is the same as all other business units within the organization. If you work for a for-profit organization, that is that we are really here to help maximize the profits of the organization. If you work for a nonprofit organization, the way I would say it is you're here to maximize the dollars that your organization raises and spends on whatever its mission is, so that those dollars raised are spent as much as possible on the mission of the organization. And so I start there to say, I don't think of our role within HR any differently than sales, marketing, finance, any other organization. We are all here to make the business as successful as possible. And we might use a slightly different lens at times, or sometimes we're using the same lens and we just happen to recognize some blind spots that others might miss. But if that is kind of my true north, That is the starting point for any kind of exploration into how to get our organizations better. And a lot of the discussion about how to get organizations better have been around this kind of topic of AI. There's questions around ethics. There are questions around kind of what it can and can't do. There are questions about how much it might change our organizations. And so we're going to focus, largely on the HR organization. But I will tell you, I think this is a small example of what is an actually much larger kind of shift that is about to impact kind of all of our workplaces. Um, Another kind of way I'm going to level set here is I don't use today with my teams the term artificial intelligence, and that's for a reason. I think it's a little kind of scary and misleading. So I like to refer to it as assistive intelligence. When I'm talking about the AI systems that we're going to discuss, I think of them as assistance tools, things that help us do our jobs. And so when I think about these kind of insistence intelligence systems or AI systems, we are today at what you can call it ANI, or narrow intelligence. There are plenty of debates happening right now, whether they are within the big companies who are kind of the most famous for developing the most public versions of these Gen AI systems, or amongst academics and amongst policymakers about how to manage the evolution of AI as it moves into AGI, which would be artificial general intelligence, when the systems are actually kind of as smart as people, when they can reason, understand empathy, and the nuance in things as well as a human can. And then there's super intelligence, or ASI, which is like the scary stuff you see some very famous names talking about, like the Skynet version of when the machines are smarter than us, what happens. We are at ANI, the kind of narrow intelligence, and probably the most famous of those tools are the generative AI systems that are available: ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and the like. So those systems are kind of built on some models that we need to understand just a little better. Natural language processing, or large language models that help us interact with those systems in a more human-like manner. And help them understand us without maybe necessarily learning how to talk to the system. I can talk to it like a person, and it can interpret those things. And at the base of all these systems is a subset of AI called machine learning. And that's something that we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about, because this becomes very interesting and is at the heart of, I think, one of the decisions HR leaders have to make, which is how do I take advantage of these tools, and understanding what machine learning is and at a high level how it works might help you better understand some of the questions around bias in the systems, and also better understand, or maybe better craft a strategy on how to kind of move your workforce into the future, leveraging some of these tools. There are also some things about computer vision that I think are incredibly impactful for people in HR roles. These are the idea of having AI algorithms inside, let's say a camera feed that's maybe watching part of a warehouse, and then could help alert you when it recognizes someone's not wearing a hard hat where they should, or someone's behaving in a way that is unsafe. So those are technologies I think HR professionals really need to start understanding, because their applications are pretty incredible. I'm not going to talk about everything. There's way too much. And so I'm going to start with the, where to start question. And that is, should we be looking at building strategies around automated decision-making technologies? These are AI technologies that help maybe either eliminate some of the human decision making in a process, or augment the human decision making in a process? Or do we start with AI technologies that allow us to kind of eliminate root tasks in a process where we're not making decisions, or at a minimum it's a decision tree, but I generally argue decision trees really aren't decisions. If this then that statements are really basic logic that can replace many root tasks. And so the question is, where do I start? I could ADM technologies like reading a resume, scoring a resume, and auto filtering resumes are things that are talked about a lot, versus technologies that allow us to complete processes without needing a human's involvement. And to kind of help make that decision, I do think we have to talk a bit more about what machine learning means. So machine learning, as I referenced, a type of AI technology that is really powering a lot of the technologies that are most popularly kind of in the lexicon today. So ChatGPT and Gemini and things like that. And the way I try to describe it to folks is think about how you would train a computer to know the difference between a dog and a cat. I will use features and try to say I could code a bunch of rules into a system that says dogs, for example, have floppy ears and cats have pointy ears. So when you recognize floppy ears, this is an attribute associated to a dog. And when you recognize pointed ears, this is an attribute associated to a cat. And I could just code those rules in. The problem is there are cats with floppy ears and there are dogs with pointed ears. And so if I were to create kind of this rule-based system, I would have to think of lots and lots and lots of attributes, lots and lots and lots of rules, and all the exceptions to them. And a human could sit there and program all of that into a system. A, that's really difficult. It takes a whole lot of time. And B, we're going to continue to find exceptions. So we're going to have to continue to refine this manual model over and over and over again. And that's how a lot of systems work for a long time. Machine learning is different. Machine learning, think of it this way, and I'm going to grossly oversimplify this, but I think it gets you the high level, at least for our purposes, to then make some decisions. Think of machine learning as instead of telling the system, here are the attributes of dogs and cats, I am going to just give the system boatloads of pictures of dogs and say, these are all dogs. And I'm going to let the system identify the patterns that it recognizes in all these dogs to kind of create these attributes. And then I'm going to give it boatloads of cats and say, these are all cats. And I'm going to let the system identify the patterns in all of these things to say, here are the patterns on what's a cat, here are the patterns on what's a dog. And I'm going to feed it not like tens or thousands, but like millions of these. And the system over time is going to slowly be able to, well, I guess really the answer is quickly be able to identify the patterns and then make predictions so that when I feed it an image it's never seen before, it can use the millions and millions of inputs and say, based on the statistical prediction I can apply to this image and the attributes I see, it's most likely that what you provided me was a dog or a cat. And really, that's what these models are doing. These models are taking in not just millions, but trillions of inputs, allowing the model to identify the attributes, identify the patterns in the data. And ultimately, it's just making a prediction about what comes next. So think of again, at a grossly oversimplified level, these models as being something where I teach or train the model over time by feeding it a bunch of inputs, letting it look for patterns, and then get on the next input I give it, it says, based on all the patterns I've seen, I can make a statistically likely prediction. All of this is based on what is really just statistical probability of what's next. So when I feed it a picture it's never seen before, it can predict the outcome based on those attributes. Maybe it's just ear length and weight and a bunch of other attributes to say, okay, here's what a dog or here's what a cat is. What is interesting about that, if you really understand that these models are effectively just saying, give me a bunch of info, let me find the patterns in the info I have, and I will make a prediction about what is next, then what you start to learn is that these models are only as good as the data that's fed to them. And in fact, if the data fed to them contained human decision-making, and human decision-making might have bias, really these models can also run the potential of having bias in them. And so these machine learning models, particularly ones that are used to automate some decision-making tasks, are where a lot of the controversy is living at the moment. And that is because researchers continue to find that there is both the opportunity for implicit and explicit bias that can be amplified by the models. And really you're starting to see not just kind of ethical questions about this, but you're also starting to see policymakers get involved. So states like New York, who have said, if you are going to have models like this, you need to actually audit the model for bias. And that is a best practice. I think a lot of people are recommending. What is interesting is it's starting to be mandated in some places. California is working on new regulations as well. And I think once New York and California have regulations, it starts to kind of trickle throughout the country. And really, researchers have found that the models in some cases are as biased as humans are. In fact, there is a very interesting experiment. We've all probably even seen examples of the old, I call it the old recruiter experiment, where you take the exact same resume, you change the name at the top of the resume, you take names that are kind of coded to stereotypes of certain racial backgrounds. So take names that typically are assumed to be related to people of Asian descent, or names assumed to be related to people of African American descent, and send them out to a bunch of recruiters. And then look at the results and how frequently they get called back. This is a very famous experiment. It's been done several times over a lot of years. And one of the things that has been kind of discovered in that is the African American coded names tend to be called back less than their white and Asian counterparts, even though the resumes are identical. Well, shocker, some of these publicly available tools are doing the exact same thing. This article from Bloomberg is interesting. You can read it, it's online, where they ran a test in ChatGPT, and guess what? The same resume, if it was coded with a name associated to African American people, was on average, ranked lower than resumes coded to Asian names. How is that? Well, again, go back to what machine learning kind of is. A bunch of stuff was fed, trillions of inputs from the internet and all sorts of sources. And whatever you then feed into the model, and if what you're feeding, for example, is here is examples of resumes of people who were successful, and here are examples of resumes of people who were not, the model, if there was bias in that, is going to amplify that bias. And so it brings me to my first kind of big takeaway, which is there is a ton of promise in this technology. Automated decision-making technology in the concept, in the narrow scope of what I just defined, doesn't have to be biased. There are ways to kind of root bias out, but I don't approach it blindly at all. And in fact, I might argue that instead, focusing on how to leverage tools like AI on some of the lower hanging fruit in the organization, like eliminating root tasks, is actually going to be really impactful to your business, particularly if you go back to that for-profit organization idea that we're here to help maximize profits of the business. I can leverage these tools to find ways to improve productivity and therefore increase profitability of my organization. But they're also just less risky. And so one of the kind of biases I personally have is I tend to focus a lot of my effort in how do I eliminate root tasks? How do I make things happen faster? And I focus a little less on leveraging AI technologies to make decisions. In fact, at our organization, I don't let our AI technologies make decisions for humans. Instead, we use them to speed things up in our process and make us more productive. And if that's the case, I'm going to highlight very quickly, I think, what that means, because like any other HR project, whether it's about AI or implementing a new ATS or payroll system or whatever that is, you kind of have to design for what your ideal process is. And so step one in my mind is like, how do we fight the bureaucracy that can creep into our processes and our organizations, and find ways to get rid of bureaucracy? Question everything that you're doing, everything you're doing from a process perspective and a technology perspective. Kind of start to design what your ideal state is. What do you want in a perfect world this to look like, even if you don't know how to do it, even if you're not even sure the technology exists to do it? Design for your ideal first. And then get into the nitty gritty, like actually go through and start process mapping your workflows and figure out like what is actually going on at a really detailed level. And then identify areas that you can automate those steps, that you can cut steps out and find ways to really cut out as much as possible, either by saying, hey, this is just kind of silly, we don't need to do it, or it's necessary, but I think I can leverage a technology or a tool like an AI tool to automate something. And then after you've done that, question it all over again and see if you did the right thing. And so I'm going to give you a very real example of how we did this at MSI. This process map, this flow chart, was what it used to take to hire somebody at MSI, to get them from the job discovery phase to the hired phase. It's a mess. You can't read it. You don't need to read it. All you need to do is look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's a lot. There's too much going on in this process. And when you have all this stuff in the process, it affects things like speed. And I care tremendously about the speed with which we can move a candidate through our process. And I care about that because I know the faster I can move a candidate through my process, the more likely they are to start with me. If I can move you through my process faster than my competitor, I can get you a job offer before you're even done interviewing or before you discover another job, or I can just impress you so much that you're going to come work with me. But speed matters. And so really, we said we've got to simplify this and we have to design a process that takes a candidate from job discovery to application, interview, assessment of that candidate to the offer and then get them in the door with as few steps as possible. And then the steps that exist, can we find a way to either automate these steps or allow candidates to work at a pace that works for the candidate instead of the pace that works for us? And so one of the ways we accomplished this was through a very large AI project. The person, it's not a person, that's also an AI generated image. That is not a real person. Her name is Mira, MSI's intelligent recruiting assistant, which I take no credit for that name. Someone on my team came up with it and I loved it. So Mira is that AI assistant who can walk a candidate from the job discovery phase literally through all the onboarding phases. And Mira is not just a chat bot. And in fact, Mira is not even I think it's not even fair to call her a chatbot based on what she does, not just really for the candidate, but what is also happening behind the scenes for us as the employer. So let me give you some very brief examples. This is a mobile phone. I recorded this on my cell phone of our career site. If I'm a candidate looking for a job, I can just start talking to Mira. So some of the technologies we discussed, like natural language processing, becomes interesting because I want a candidate to be able to talk to Mira the way they would talk to a person, which I hate chatbots. I actually really hate chatbots because too frequently, the old chatbots, I should say, you had to like talk to them exactly right. And it felt like a text version of a phone tree when I call a really big company, and they would drive me insane. So I would do to the chatbot what I do to the phone tree, which is I just go representative, 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 because I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to go to your phone tree. Just like, let me talk to a person. So one of the things is Mira needs to talk to candidates and understand candidates in natural language. That's really important. Otherwise, people aren't going to use it. The other one was Mira has to talk to and work with candidates kind of the way they want to work. So I'll stop the video here. Let's not go through the whole application process, but let's say part of a natural candidate experience. I found this job, but I don't have time to keep going through this. The next question Mira's going to ask is for some contact info. And as soon as I send that, Mira's going to start texting me if I give her permission to do it. And as a candidate, I don't want to sit here on this. I've got stuff to do. So Mira texts me. I stopped talking to Mira, but that's okay because I have her now on my phone. So I am now texting with Mira, and Mira has sent me an application, asked me to fill it out. But I'm telling Mira, I don't want to fill out your application yet. I have some more questions first, and so I want to be able to engage with Mira the way I want, when I want. And that was one of the kind of requirements we had is it needs to be natural. You have to be able to talk to the system the way you would talk to a person. And it's got to work on the candidate's time and the candidate's place using the method the candidate prefers. And so we can do something like pick up the conversation through text messages, which are all happening with an AI chat bot, which I just told you I hate because it doesn't feel like I'm talking to a chat bot. And so as I go through that process with Mira, the other benefit is what it eliminates internally. So the system is connected to our Exchange server. And let's say once I'm ready to move a candidate forward to the interview phase, well, oh my gosh, scheduling interviews is a pain in the butt. Anyone that works in TA knows this. You schedule them, you reschedule them, you're looking at multiple calendars. Hey, I've got, 3 people that need to interview this candidate, and that interview has to happen in a particular order. I can't use a solution like Calendarly, which no knock on them. I like the solution, but it doesn't work in that scenario. And so ultimately, some of the design was, well, how do I integrate Mira into our Exchange server so that the conversation with the candidate is not only natural, but is also happening at the candidate's pace. I'm not waiting on a human recruiter to find times on someone's calendar and have a conversation to book the interview. But also, I can use Mira to do a lot of the TA work we used to do, like sending reminders and, hey, don't forget to show up. And the candidate go, oh, by the way, I've got something comes up, I can't make it. Okay, well, let's reschedule the interview. And so part of this is about the candidate facing. I'm so concerned about not feeling inhuman that, quite honestly, beyond the job discovery and some interview scheduling and some reminders, most of this process is still human to the candidate. But behind the scenes for us, it's actually been so automated that it's quite amazing. In fact, we use Mira internally more than candidates use Mira externally to automate all sorts of things. Like the AI in the system with Mira can recognize when, for example, a candidate's having a problem with an application and alert us that a human needs to get involved, or a candidate is unhappy, or they're a person like me that goes representative, 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 and Mira will tell us that and let a human jump in and interact with the candidate. Mira can also tell people, hey, by the way, the offer you want to send this candidate's been approved. You've got some work to do, hiring manager. And in fact, here's the link. Go make this offer to the candidate. Pick up the phone, call them, make the offer, then click this button and send it to them. Mira can remind hiring managers, hey, go fill out that interview eval form. In fact, let me just send you a link. Do it right now on your cell phone while you're walking back to your office, and you can do the interview eval form and so many other things. And so really, what was the idea when we tried to search for a technology that would allow us to pull this off? It was speed and automation. It was eliminating the parts of our process that humans had no value in. And so, does a human add value in scheduling an interview? Well, I guess it does if the interview is scheduling is complex and a system can't do it. But if a system can do it, isn't it better to let an AI system find the patterns in the 3 outlook calendars that people are available, present them to a candidate, and let the candidate say, yeah, that option works, or none of these work. Click a link. Here are all the other options that work. I want this one. And that interview get booked and a person not need to be in the process. In fact, I can get really aggressive with this speed concept. So we hire CDL drivers. These are, for many years, were harder to hire than doctors, engineers, and lawyers. CDL drivers was the hardest job in the country to hire for quite some time. And it's still one of the hardest jobs to hire for because of the supply and demand dynamics on the labor side with drivers. And it's a really transferable skill. If I can drive a truck for you, I can drive a truck for the person next to you. And so speed mattered a lot with CDL drivers. And the problem is there's a lot of federal compliance that gets pushed on you when you try to hire a CDL licensed driver, a Class A or Class B driver, and certain things about how the application works and things you have to review. It's a pain. And I have 50 branches. I don't have HR people in all these branches. So I had local people trying to navigate all of this. Well, guess what? This isn't their first job. It's like the 19th thing on their list of things to do today. If I'm a supervisor in like Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where I don't have an HR person in my building because there's only 15 people in that showroom and warehouse. Well, oh my gosh, this is tricky. This is actually kind of hard to get them to care as much about speed as I care, because they've got customers in their face. They're worried about that. And so ultimately what was happening is when we were trying to engage with CDL drivers, it would take us days just to get a CDL driver to the point where we're booking a phone screen, and then days to get them on site in an interview. This is actual MSI data. that shows you how dramatically that has changed. In fact, from the moment a candidate gives us their name and they're created in the system to when they are scheduled for a phone screen with a recruiter is less than 6 minutes. This is the aggregate average. So from the moment that driver finds my job and starts talking to Mira to the moment when they have a confirmed interview with a recruiter, 5 minutes and 58 seconds is the average right now. That went from days to minutes. This is really the power of systems that allow you to automate things that humans don't really add value in. And I'll be honest, the way we achieve this is we got really aggressive. We were able to look at boatloads of data and say, I actually also know that if I can get a driver on the hook quicker with an interview, I can have them fill that application out after they've scheduled their interview. They're more likely to fill the application out. So we don't even ask for an application yet because, again, it's a transferable skill. I am more likely to find good candidates in a pool of drivers for a driver job than maybe everybody who applies for a warehouse job. So I'm not quite this aggressive with all my jobs, but with a driver job, I want you on the hook quick because they're hard to hire and I need them. And in fact, it is now less than 3 days from the moment in which that driver discovers the job and gives us their name and we can create them in the system to when they're scheduled for that on-site interview. So they've gone through scheduling a phone screen, filling out the application, and getting a booked interview with a local hiring manager. And this is really where the rubber starts to meet the road for some of these AI technologies. It's sped up our time to schedule from days to minutes. I mean, huge savings in speed, but it eliminated 20% of my recruiting work because that was how much of our team's time we were spending scheduling and rescheduling interviews. And really, 85% of what we call Recruiter One disappeared with this work. And so we have to talk now about what does this mean? Because what you'll also see is I eliminated nearly all of the manual onboarding work. Like Mira is great and all for the talent acquisition part up front, but the real power that the business sees who is outside of HR is that Mira does all the onboarding now. And Mira does that while the candidate's sitting at home at a time and place they choose to do it, instead of us bringing them in the building, their new supervisor in Oklahoma City, who doesn't really understand what an I-9 is, but has been trained on how to fill it out, is trying to get it filled out and the tax forms and legal documents. And then someone in HR is auditing them, finds the mistake they always make, goes back to the candidate to get it fixed. All that's been eliminated. The teams don't have any of that work. Mira does that. And what's really amazing is 25% of my team's kind of non-TA work was eliminated, largely because of how much time we were spending onboarding and auditing what these branches were doing if HR didn't sit in the branch. And so ultimately, there is a really big, looming, elephant-sized problem that every business is about to face. And that is, I don't think we are being honest enough about how disruptive AI is about to be. I was at the SHRM conference, and I think the data they shared is 1 in 3 jobs is going to be severely impacted by future advancements in AI technologies over, I think it was the next 6 or 7 years, whatever, in the very near future. 1 in 3 people. In fact, I think SHRM is like predicting this will be the single most disruptive thing to happen in the workplace since the civil rights movement because of how disruptive. Now, here's the amazing thing. I believe the phrase that I think it's said too much, which is AI won't replace you, the person using AI will. I think that is true. The problem is that means we have an upskilling imperative with our workforce. If I go back to our example, we knew we were going to eliminate a boatload of work. That's a scientific term, a boatload of work. And so ultimately, we said, I have all these folks in a Recruiter One role that right then and there, when we made this decision and said 9 months from now, that work is going away, I'm not going to lay them off. I've got to do something else. So we had to upskill them to do Recruiter 2 work. We had to get them ready to conduct phone screens. We had to shift our whole model. And there's a lot of training that had to happen to get that group of people ready. Now, expand that to your whole organization. Oh my gosh. Like, it's disruptive in HR. It's way more disruptive in areas like sales. It's even more disruptive in your accounting team. your payroll team, your finance team. Like if you have a marketing team with copywriters still who write stuff, like, hey, you're behind, because I think most people figured out that AI is pretty good at this, and you need way fewer people than you needed before because each individual person is way more productive than they've ever been before. And so there's a massive upskilling imperative. And so the other truth about this is you've got to upskill your workforce right now. You've got to start getting ready. And in the context of HR, you've got to think about, for example, larger organizations with a COE, a Center of Excellence model, and an HR business partner model. I think almost everything at Center of Excellence is going to get automated. And so you got to start thinking about, how am I going to upskill this group of people to do more value added, higher level work when I can automate so much of what they're doing today. So here's my vision kind of what's coming. First and foremost, good HR work is going to be good HR work tomorrow, just like it is today. And to do that, our HR teams have to have a really deep understanding of the business, and they have to be true partners with leaders. What is going to happen is this statement becomes more true in 5 years and even more true in 10 years. Workflows are going to get simplified, consolidated, and they're going to better support business outcomes because it's going to be less about admin work and more about what outcome are we trying to achieve and how quickly can we achieve it. We're going to see people leveraging AI to improve employee and candidate interactions, giving people kind of more direct access to their data and the ability to affect change. Because today, my payroll team doesn't let you do certain changes as an employee. That's because I don't trust you to not make a mistake. I trust 2 people in payroll not to make a mistake and double check everything. Well, in the future, I can catch those mistakes. I can put them in front of you before you even make them. And I can push more of this so that employees can do things on their own. And that's going to improve productivity. It's going to improve service. It's going to improve so many different things. These kind of consolidated HR services and talent acquisition functions are going to exist to empower leaders and decision makers to deliver high quality candidates. There's going to be less admin junk work. And in fact, that's happening now. And this shift is going to continue at a very dramatic pace because these world-class technologies are going to drive everything that we do. I'll give an example, a training program in L&D. Oh my gosh, I now produce narrated training content where the narrator is AI driven, which has eliminated the need for someone to sit and record on a microphone the narration for something built in Articulate to deliver an e-learning module where I have wildly human sounding. I mean, you can't tell the difference that these are human sounding voices. So now all I need to do is prepare a script, and I can also prepare scripts faster than I ever have before. And so the scale at which a smaller number of people can impact the organization continues to grow. And these powerful AI and BI tools are really going to help with this data analysis to reveal things about employees that we can't see today because we're not noticing these 17 disparate pieces of data, and all these different systems are pointing to this one prediction, and these models are going to make it easier to find those things. I will highlight, and then I think we should probably take questions. This isn't all perfect. In fact, it is a little messy now. The evolving outcomes of these systems mean you've got to really monitor them very, very closely. And I'm going to share some pretty silly examples with you, but I think it's important that you and your teams know what the systems can and can't do. That is really important. Hallucinations. If you have never heard of them, after this, go Google AI hallucinations. Actually, Gen AI hallucinations probably give you a better result. Or go into ChatGPT and say, what does it mean when you hallucinate? It'll tell you. It means when it makes stuff up that isn't true. These models are not good with truth and fact. They are good at providing answers, and sometimes they're not right answers. Natural language processing and large language models can also produce outputs from your chat systems you were not expecting. And candidates are really surprising. And when they're talking to these systems, they can be even more surprising. And then how those systems react might get a little weird. So a great example, if you haven't heard about the strawberry test, you should probably go do it. It's pretty interesting. Go ask ChatGPT how many R's are in the word strawberry. Sometimes it gets the answer right, and sometimes it gets the answer wrong. I did this, a screenshot from my phone, and it said there are 3 R's in the word strawberry. It spelled the word strawberry. Sorry, it said there are two R's the first time I asked it. There are two R's in the word strawberry. It spelled the word strawberry and then counted the R's incorrectly. And when I said, hey, that doesn't look right, I got a really silly answer, which was, oh, you're right. I was moving too fast. I might have missed it. No, you didn't. You're not a human. You don't have a brain. You weren't moving too fast. This answer is not true because the models are designed to give human-like answers. The real answer to this is ChatGPT relies on a token-based system that takes the word strawberry and breaks it into smaller bits. Those bits are called tokens, and sometimes it breaks the word strawberry into two tokens, and there's an R in each, and it sees two, or it'll break it into three tokens, and it'll catch the R in each of the tokens, and it's only counting an instance of that letter in each token. So the models are not perfect, but I think aside from that, because that's a problem about compute power that's also getting solved very quickly, and pretty soon those tokens will be at the single letter level, and this will be even better. But the answer is what's interesting. You've got to probe. So you've got to learn how to create the right kind of question within these systems. It's called prompting and prompt engineering. If you haven't heard about it, go learn about prompt engineering because that's really important. The other really good example, back on the hallucinations topic, is when these systems make stuff up. Like the lawyer, this is a famous example, used ChatGPT to create a legal brief, submitted the brief. He said, here's the argument I want to make. And ChatGPT structured it. It cited case law to support his argument in the correct format, did all those things. It looked great. He submitted to the court. The problem is it made up the cases. Those cases did not exist. And that guy got in a boatload of trouble. Boatload, again, it's my favorite scientific measurement. He got in a lot of trouble. He was, in fact, sanctioned by the judge because he submitted something that was just patently false. And so you've got to understand that these systems are really good at some things. I think of them like interns. I think it's the best way to think of these systems. I wouldn't trust everything an intern tells me. I'm going to go double check the facts. I do the same thing with ChatGPT. I actually don't use ChatGPT for facts. Google and people who have learned how to like find truth on the internet, Google's a little better actually at that than a system like ChatGPT. But ChatGPT is a better brainstorming partner than a system like Google. So you got to know how to use these systems. Here's my last example. Again, candidates are weird, and sometimes these systems are surprising. And so although Mira tells people I am MSI's intelligent recruiting assistant, and she does not try to pretend that she's a real human, candidates miss that. The NLP technology makes them feel like they're talking to a person. And in this example, this candidate started hitting on my AI system. And you can see what caught me off guard was her first response. He says, after she gets the application done and says, how else can I help you? He says, oh, you pretty. And Mira says, oh, and you're very nice, with a little ellipses at the front. I read that and went, what? Like, I was shocked. And then if you continue to read the chat, and I didn't put the whole thing here, he like gets a little inappropriate with our AI, and how she starts to respond was interesting. So I mean, our product team, we partnered with another vendor to help us create this whole workflow. So I had IT people internally and externally going, why are we getting these responses? So you've got to watch this stuff closely to make sure that the outcomes are what you expected. And so my punchline for all of this is, if you're not using AI now, you are very behind. It isn't a technology of the future. It's a technology of right now. And if you're not, all you got to do 15 minutes a day. Just go play in ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot for 15 minutes a day. Read one article a day about how this can impact your work. And you're going to start to build a knowledge about it, because if you don't have that knowledge now, you are actually behind. You need to train your teams as you start to implement these technologies on what they can and can't do. It's like any other tool. You wouldn't sit someone down in front of Excel and say, go produce this report for me, if you didn't teach them how to use Excel. You can't expect them to just use these tools and use them correctly if you don't teach them. And you have to plan and design before you implement any technology. This is no different. So, yeah, could you just go tomorrow, right now, and create a job description in ChatGPT? It's a popular example. Sure, you could, but like, you've got to have a little more thought. Like, what's the structure? All these things that exist in good HR work today before you implement any tool. It's the same thing with AI. And again, I think you focus on automation over automated decision making, in part because you have a lot of work you can automate in most organizations, but also it's the least risky of all of these. So if you're thinking about compliance and protecting the company from risk, this is a great way to do that. And then you have a huge upskilling imperative across your whole organization. But if you're starting in HR, you have to start thinking now, if I'm going to be automating some of this work or I can eliminate some of this work, what are you going to do with your team? What other work can they do that adds more value to your organization than the work that they do today? And there's a huge upskilling imperative for the rest of your organization. So if you're not thinking about these things now, I still think you're behind. And then two, if someone else in your organization is playing with this tool and you don't know, and they figure out how to make hundreds of people redundant, and now you're all of a sudden the HR person going, wait a minute, what do you mean we've got to lay people off? You don't want to be in that spot. Get ahead of that so you can work with your organizations on how are we upskilling our workforce to drive more value to the organization so you don't get caught by surprise. Um, that's my quick version. That is it scary? That's the quick version, Liv. That's the quick version of all of this.
I'm like, I can only imagine everyone's notes, that they're typing or writing. And thank you, Chris, for talking through. We have quite a few questions, so I'm going to try to pivot and
Sure.
and get as many questions out there. But thank you, and audience, just a reminder, we were recording, so if your hand or your fingers weren't typing quick enough, don't worry. You'll have the recording here in a little bit. One of the most common questions was on Mira
Yeah.
and whether you guys used a vendor or if you created Mira. And I have kind of a follow-up question on that based off of some other questions, but I'll let you kind of answer that one.
Yeah, we partner with a third party. So the base technology of Mira is with a vendor, and there are a number of vendors in this space. The vendor we picked was in part because of the technology, but in part because of how flexible they're willing to be. Because we built of our total workflow solution, we only built 50% of it. Our vendor had the other part, and you had to figure out how to fuse those two pieces together. I'll tell you, as you look at vendors, some things that are really important to me because of how our organization works is, we need partners that are going to be flexible enough to kind of work within the system that we design. Remember, I told you, design your system, then worry about the tech. I believe that, but that also means I can't work with inflexible partners because I designed my workflow before I found you. And so the partner we work with, I think, was very flexible with us, but we didn't design all that. We have another AI system called Genie that actually has company data. Our sales team uses it. We built that completely in-house. So we also had a head start in that we understood how these technologies worked and used that knowledge to help us identify kind of what we want to do in talent acquisition. But we chose not to build that technology because I actually think there are plenty of wonderful vendors out there who this is their gig and they're pretty good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that goes kind of the poll question we were talking about, right? Like ask the questions to your current providers, whether it's your ATS, your HRIS, your payroll solution, and ask them how they're leveraging AI and their roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question kind of related to Mira was, specifically Kate asked, how did the CDL drivers feel about interacting with Mira? Most I've met don't like doing anything online. I might expand that and just say, do you get feedback from applicants or candidates, on Mira and their experience, and what does that look like?
I can count on one hand the number of people who refused to interact with Mira.
Hmm.
And we're engaging with like somewhere between 8 and 9 thousand applications a month, and talking to more people than that. I mean, Mira is answering somewhere between 350 and 370 questions a day today, and so I can count on one hand the number of people who refused to interact with Mira. It's not many. The CDL drivers were not my biggest worry. My warehouse, like kind of entry level manual unskilled labor population. There is one truth about how we operate, which is every employee in our company has to use an iPad to do their job. We build, other than the vendor we partner with to build Mira, nearly everything else we build in-house ourselves. And so our warehouse management system, everything we built ourselves, we designed it to work on iPads. And since the iPad came out, we've been figuring out how to get an iPad in every employee's hand to do their job. And so a warehouse employee needs to be able to use that technology to just scan a QR code for a warehouse location. So I was comfortable setting the bar at you've got to be able to talk to Mira. But
Yeah.
I just haven't had issues. It's not been a big deal. And again, if someone says, I don't want, I've had people say, are you an AI? Yes. I don't want to talk to you. Get me a human. And Mira alerts us, and a recruiter can either jump in as Mira and answer questions if Mira's not doing well, which happens from time to time, or pick up a phone and call. The beauty of how the system is designed is humans take over immediately when needed and then can back out and Mira can finish. And frequently the candidate has no clue that it was a
Mm.
person or an AI answering a question they had. In fact, I had an example 2 days ago where I jumped in. I was doing some audits to see if everybody was doing what I told them to do. And I noticed a candidate asking a really weird question on an unrelated and I figured out what was going on. Mira was not answering well. I jumped in and answered. At the end, she goes, wait, is this the AI answering me? And I was like, should I say yes or no? And I was like, yeah, I got to say yes. I'm not going to lie to you. I said, no, this is a recruiter. I guess I lied a little. This is a recruiter, but I'm going to let Mira take over. And she went, oh, wow, that's great. Thank you. She didn't realize even until the moment that I started answering, hey, I noticed this and you're doing this and you're doing this. And I told her what was going on that she went, oh, something has changed. What she didn't realize is earlier in the day, it was also a human who happened to jump in and then jump back out and she never even noticed. So I just don't have that issue today.
Yeah. Yeah. Super insightful. And the chat is just filling up and in the questions area. So I know we don't have time for all of these questions, and Chris does have his LinkedIn available, so we'll share that too. Kind of maybe the last question to wrap up. Um, is here from Janice. How do you start the process to get these tools available? Is that part of your responsibility or another department? I guess maybe, Chris, if you could share some insight of like MSI's approach to AI, right? And getting that buy-in, creating that culture that's innovative and accepting kind of the direction technology's going.
Yeah, I'll answer it in two ways. First, kind of culturally, I do think it needs to you need to have a culture of innovation, I think, to be a successful business. Here, our founder, who's the most retired CEO I've ever met, actually it pushes AI hard. He's in the office 6 days a week, and like AI is pretty much all he focuses on.
Mm.
I'll tell you from an execution standpoint on the project, this was all driven by HR. In fact, we got IT involved when we said we've identified a solution that if you can build this for us, this vendor can do this, IT, can we pull this off? IT was not involved in the beginning. And so, I get this question even from my CHRO counterparts. I have a very strong belief in this area. This is not IT work. This is work the business should drive. IT's job is to help us make sure we have the right guardrails to keep the organization safe. But this was work we drove. And then we told IT, this is the solution. What do you need to know to vet this for all the things you care about? And I got buy-in from our CEO before I got buy-in from IT, because then I had the weight of saying, we've decided this is a good solution. IT help me figure out, is this vendor what we can work with from a security standpoint, and how do we execute on this vision? And then as a team, we figured all that out together, but we drove the work.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a great question, Janice. I know we covered a lot here, and you're like, okay, is this something my team can do, for the organization, for your team? And I think just reiterating what Chris said was start with the low-hanging fruit, and that workflow that Chris, you built out, and kind of the hiring and onboarding process, even just mapping that out feels like a good place to start.
What I'll tell you, the biggest way to get anybody to buy in,
Yeah.
turn the savings into dollars. It is really hard to argue that my solution costs X, I save Y, the delta is added profit to the business. Now, you might tell me, hey, timing wise, I don't have resources. Let's do this in 6 months, whatever. But it's really hard to tell me it's a bad idea when I can turn everything into dollars and cents. So my other piece of advice is do a little bit of that work within your HR teams to show the financial savings if you were to implement a tool like this, because that's usually the easiest thing to show is, and I'm going to be able to generate X amount of additional profit dollars by saving us this money.
Yeah, yeah. And Chris, we actually had an episode on that. I think maybe season 2 or season
We
3.
did.
Love that. Perfect segue there. But I know there are so many more questions. Chris did, allow us to put his LinkedIn on there for you all to connect. And I saw some individuals sharing their LinkedIn in the chat. So glad everyone can network and connect with each other. Again, I just want to thank the episode sponsors, Smart Recruiters, our partners on the Verified First side. And Chris, just thank you again so much for your insight. I mean, just I will be rewatching this episode multiple times. It was nice to just hear and learn from you, and the direction that MSI is going is really, really exciting stuff.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And yeah, if there are specific questions, you can ask me anything on LinkedIn. If you tell me that you like we're in this, I'll actually answer you. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, just message me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer.
Fantastic. And for those of you that were, awaiting a Sherman HRCI code, we've got those here. Go ahead and take a screenshot. I'll leave it on here for 30 seconds or so, and then we'll go about our day and week. But again, Chris, thank you so much. Every time we have you on HR at the Table, we're just so thankful for your time and your insight. So thank you everyone for joining us. Stay tuned for next month's episode. You can visit verifiedfirst.com and then HR at the Table there for upcoming episodes and to subscribe. So everyone have a great rest of your week. Thanks again, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.